No beats. I remember we actually didn't. We turned it off for the Tyler live stream. So, well, there we go. Just pretend you've got beats and I'll edit it into the audio one. So, good afternoon and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Coast TV. It's your fortnightly fast charge, Son Beats, on electric vehicles and infrastructure. We are the other side of the trio down today with Eric back from his journeys down to Southern California and Bolt Block Party. And Walter is out on the road from a pilot flying jet. I think we saw actually. Let me go all the way back to the beginning to set the stage of telling us where you are and what you're driving. Walter Schulte is at a pilot travel center in White Pine, Tennessee, driving his wife's 2023 Cadillac Lyric debut. And I'm in Boston, Massachusetts, driving my Bolt EV and having to get some expertise from you, Eric, maybe because the tire pressure monitor system has raised its flag as a problem. So
you have a 2017 now, right?
Correct. Yeah. So I need to figure that out. But we are available mostly next day. I'm going to actually do this tonight so that I can get this onto the audio platforms as quickly as possible and troubleshoot any issues. So thank you to everyone who's flagged those when they've been a bit later and helped me get back into the groove of doing that. And you can also check out evi.plugandplayev.com for weekly updates on exactly this, EV infrastructure. So join that if you haven't already. Get your weekly dose to kind of complement Walter's AFDC video updates. And we will crack straight into the news here as I put people's intros up down below. And it's an old news, but we'll kind of dovetail it to some good news and some GM news more recently. The Chevy Bolt is back. We had the Bolt Block Party, lots of coverage from that. Walter and I spoke to Tyler at the Average EV. I will link that down in the show notes. A good hour of chatter on that. Eric has hours and hours of content that are well worth your time and even more to say. So I think before we get into GM's other news, just what are your feelings in general, Eric, of the Bolt being back and your experience heading down to the Block Party?
Oh, so we're going to do that first?
Well, I suppose we can kind of offset it. The more recent news is, GM's kind of 1.6 billion black hole for electric vehicles in a similar vein to Ford. There's a lot of this is R&D, this is production cost, this is ramping the whole transition to electric vehicles. So obviously that was a large piece. And in this week we've had the GM-backed BrightDrop, the fleet and delivery vehicle, which was by all accounts a really, really good delivery kind of fleet option. They're dropping that as a going concern by the sound of it. So there's obviously that side of the EV, piece is not as positive, but then the affordable and the Bolt coming back, the general stable of affordable EVs that we've talked about. There's this duality of headlines at the moment that you're probably as well placed as anyone to kind of help unpack for us.
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely, because there was some push and pull there with Shad at the Bolt Block Party was basically, hey, this is going to be our 15th EV, and then now we find out that BrightDrop, and because BrightDrop was moved under the Chevrolet brand as well, so having that shut down, and I mean, this is what I've been saying for some time, and it's I think should be of concern to everybody, is I think we're seeing larger economic issues at play, and those are of course going to impact corporations as well, and especially I think I would consider GM to be more of a conservative culture. So they're everything that we see from GM is they are foreseeing or anticipating some sort of a major economic slowdown, right? Because like even within the GM press release for the new Chevrolet Bolt, they very specifically called out that they expect the Bolt plus the Equinox EV to represent a majority of their EV sales moving forward. So Yet, despite that, they're also only committing to a single shift at Fairfax, Kansas for the Bolt. And I haven't seen exact numbers on that, but typically a shift can produce something like 90 to 100,000 vehicles a year, generally speaking. So I don't know that someone might actually have better numbers on that or more exact numbers, but 100,000 Bolts and 100,000 Equinox EVs, that probably would represent a majority of Chevrolet's EV sales in a single year. So, but it's the fact that they're focusing on these low cost, and then with BrightDrop, it was primarily the commercial fleet sales, right? And if they're not getting traction there, they can't really. I mean, I think it makes a better RV in some ways, right? Like they could team up with like Winnebago or something and make a little RV. But yeah, if they're shutting that off, then I think this just overall is not good news for the economy. And I think I even saw a recent news story about the delinquent credit card debt in America is the highest it's been since basically 2010. So coming off the heels of the financial crisis in 2008. So we're not in great shape. So I think if the automakers are responding to that, then I think there are some issues. So yeah, but again, I think to your point, it's not as though we aren't seeing a major commitment from some of these automakers still towards electric vehicles. And then, of course, in particular, the more affordable electric vehicles. And I don't know if we wanted to segue away from the news, though, and just like kind of talk about the Bolt block party.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth saying, up front that we've kind of got a potluck of stuff today because we've all been on the road, and obviously Walter is now as well. So we wanted to cover the stuff that we've been doing a little bit. I've got Electrify Expo down in New York for some of the industry day, and obviously Eric was at the block party and has a lot of coverage of that. But we're totally willing to go into other topics, so questions, comments, things you'd like to cover. We will also get to those, but it's linked to GM. It's kind of one of the great, hopes of the affordable end of the EV market coming into 2026. So yeah, I think, what you've seen there and your summary, and then anything else that you've kind of had thoughts on after you've published that content would definitely be kind of germane.
Yeah. And I think you had mentioned this too, when we were talking about the show, is there's this topic about what we can expect for the Chevrolet Bolt run, because I think people took that quote about the limited run Bolt. I think they took it out of context, and I think they ran with it, right? And I do not think in retrospect that Chevrolet was saying what people have interpreted it to mean. So at the presentation, you could tell it was mostly designers and engineers. While they had been given their talking points at this block party from marketing, we were interfacing directly with the engineers and designers for the Bolt. So we were talking to people who knew all the technical specs off the top of their heads. We knew they know about what's going on in Fairfax in terms of tooling and production ramp up, all of that. And so I think what we got at the block party, while it was a level of access that I think I've never experienced necessarily, and I don't know that a lot of people, even members of the press there, have, because like I said, you don't generally interface with designers and engineers directly. There's usually some marketing person standing in between you. And in this case, it was kind of direct from like the project owners, project managers, lead engineers. And the thing is, I think when they said limited run, in retrospect, I think they were talking only about the launch edition. And I would have liked them to clarify this, but if you compare what they said at the presentation with the GM press release after the fact, one thing that they missed is they implied that the launch edition would be an RS. The press release that came the day later verified that it wasn't an RS, it was an LT. So the launch edition is an LT. And that addresses our confusion at the time of how is the launch edition RS only $1,000 more than the base level LT that's going to come out later. That made like no sense to anybody there. And I know I wasn't the only one that interpreted it that way because a lot of us did. But what was meant by that was the launch edition would be an LT. Then there would be a cheaper LT later. And then there would be the RS with sort of an unspecified MSRP, but we expect somewhere between starting around 32,000 going up to as high as maybe 36 or maybe 37,000 at the very most. And so when they said the launch edition, get it while you can, it's a limited run, that's specifically what they were talking about. Because when I talked to Mandy Damon after the fact, just one-on-one in person, and I said, limited run, and she said, we're going to build to demand. So as far as we know, they do not have any constraints. And if they are sourcing, we don't know who they're sourcing their LFP batteries for or from for this initial run of the Chevrolet Bolt, but it's suspected it's CATL. It's suspected it's, a Chinese company. And even if it isn't CATL, China has been overproducing LFP cells so much that they have such a backlog that they can't necessarily even use them, because that was sort of the mandate of the Chinese government: just produce as much as you can. We'll figure it out later. And so, I think CATL alone, as of last year, was something like 400 to 500 gigawatt hours of annual battery production. That's massive, right? That's more than the entire world was producing just 5 years ago. So I think I don't think that there's going to be a supply limit from GM Chevrolet's side. I think they're going to build as many as they can to meet demand. And if that demand then dictates a second shift at Fairfax, they'll spin up a second shift at Fairfax. So, and when it comes to limited run, if you want the launch edition LT, that's $1,000 more than the base LT. And I don't even know right now all exactly what separates the two. That's going to be a limited run. You're going to have to probably get that in the first few months that it's available. And then after that, it's only going to be LT. And then you're going to be paying more for an RS version. So that's, I think, the big rumor I would want to get out of the way first is this isn't a limited run, right? They're going to build as many as they can while this platform is available. So,
and yeah, I mean, it's good to clarify that, because there was obviously a lot of confusion and not necessarily helped by some of the kind of maybe it's the way GM did it, and I think it's laudable that they got so many Bolt owners, and they kind of emphasized the value of listening to the community, but maybe it also lost a little bit in translation of the actual details and nuances of the pricing and that. But Walter had pointed out, as we spoke to Tyler, that this slide here that he had pulled out for us, has this next gen affordable EV alongside the Chevrolet Bolt. I mean, obviously it's called just the Bolt now, not the Bolt EV. But we have that kind of focus on, the Equinox end, the Bolt end, and then I think in an interview on the podcast with Inside EVs last week, Mark Bruce had said, we're committed to this affordable end of the market. We're looking at a series, not just the Bolt, not just the Equinox, of affordable EVs that fit the Chevy brand and start to take advantage of the company's, size and scale to produce these things. Where do you see? I mean, it's hard to see something fitting in below the Bolt, maybe, and maybe the Bolt price coming down at 25K, but I guess we've still got that area of the 20k vehicles, that are on the combustion side to really crack into. Do you see that on the roadmap, or is that just kind of pipe dreams for the moment?
No, I do. And 2 words: Spark EV. Oh, but yeah.
Tracks. What about tracks?
I mean, it could be tracks or whatever, but no, I think I think there is room in GM's lineup for another Chevrolet product that kind of scoots in under the Bolt. And I forget, someone in one of my comments on one of my videos had mentioned, hey, look, the Bolt isn't actually an economy car. When you look at all of the bells and whistles that come with it, it really does kind of push past the basic economy car in a number of ways. So like the base level bare bones Chevrolet Bolt is going to have a lot more features and a lot more capabilities than the base Chevrolet Trax, right? So yes, there's almost a $10,000 difference between the two, but the Trax is a very bare bones, right? Very basic economy car. So I think too, we saw when they had that initial presentation, I'm still picturing it now. I wish I had the picture available. But it was the GM is a roadmap for like 19 electric vehicles in the US domestic market by the end of the decade or whatever. And they were all under car coverings, and there was one there that was under a car covering, and they had already specified their intent to make a 6-module Ultium EV. So if we look at what the Bolt would be equivalent to, because it's not on the Ultium chassis, right? It's on the old BEV2, not the new BEV3 chassis. But if it were on the BEV3 chassis, it would be the equivalent of an 8-module EV platform. So if they already had plans for a 6-module BEV3 Ultium platform, that would inherently be smaller than the Bolt. Now, maybe a little bit bigger than the Spark EV was. I mean, in terms of size, I thought the Trax is fairly comparable to the Bolt, but I'm not that much up on the Trax. But it would be something that I would say would be a smaller car that's a little less feature rich, and you could get it probably close to about 200 miles. So it would basically be kind of like the decontented Nissan that we're expecting with the 50 kilowatt hour battery pack and 200 miles of range. Only I think they would be able to undercut it by another $5,000 probably. So yeah, we could very easily see a low $20,000 alternative, like super economy. This is your first car. What is it, like the Nissan Kicks sort of idea, where this is meant for first time car buyers who are on a budget, and it's enough to get you from place to place and not worry about it. So
yeah, I mean, this is what kind of Tyler at the Average EV had pitched a little bit towards the end of the podcast that we did with him, was the combustion vehicles that are at that end of the market, the 18 to 20 to 122,000, are no frills. I mean, and that's kind of to your point about the Bolt EV, or the Bolt now not being it's not a bargain basement car. I mean, there are certainly some aspects to the one that I'm driving now, but even after 120,000 miles, and yours will be similar, that it's held up and it still has a lot of things in there that I don't even have in my Ioniq 5, and still wouldn't have if I bought a 2025 Ioniq 5. So there's pieces in there that gives it some room below to really get into, and that's where it was an interesting kind of comparison of like, well, yeah, you do have maybe $20,000 price point combustion vehicles, but they still have all of that, and they have the worst parts of the drawbacks of combustion, right? They have very small tanks, they have rattle traps, they have no insulation, so all of that road noise is coming in, and you lose a lot of the benefits of EV. So EV is probably worth a certain amount of premium, but maybe there is room to squeeze in even more bare bones kind of vehicle just to do A to B, because people who are traveling 10-15 miles to work really don't care. They just want that lowest possible cost form of running transportation.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a lot to the concept that the Bolt was really designed as a rideshare platform. When you really think of it that way, because of all of the vehicles, it was the one that focused the most on rear passenger space over everything else. So it's an efficient car, it's simple to drive, but it's got this massive rear passenger space. So enough room for luggage for one, maybe two people. And all of a sudden now you have basically a perfect taxi cab, right, for around the city. Whereas I could see an offering under that entry level offering being more focused on just a single or a small family, or minimal minimal occupants, and just a cheap entry level. This is what you buy for your kid when they graduate from college, and it will get them around.
So if we do a leap from the 20,000 end of the market to the 120,000 plus, that kind of brings me into Electrify Expo down in New York, because I've been quick to kick GM when I've been to these shows, not specifically Expo, but also the New York Auto Show, the Chicago Auto Show, and the booths and the presence of electric vehicles is just underwhelming, right? There's been too little for all of the kind of 15, 20, 25 EVs by X date. And it's obviously been global, and, we've had variations on that number. But it's always been a little bit underwhelming, where the gas trucks and the combustion side is just overshadowing this, the Bolt EV and the Bolt EUV. And this is the first time that I've looked at the GM, and first through Chevy, through to Cadillac, through to GMC sections of the show, and just gone, they've absolutely delivered. I don't have enough time today to go through all of these vehicles and film every single vehicle to look at the things I might want to kind of cover. So going from, I don't know if they even had the Bolt there. That's the beauty of it. All these things were still, it was the Equinox EV, Blazer EV, Silverado EV. Then you went up to the Denali, Hummers. Cadillac just had a mind-blowing amount with the Optique, Vistique, all of the high-end kind of Escalade. That's where the 120,000 plus starts to kick in. But it felt like this is it. They've arrived, and we've harped on about this, the roster that Chevy has now, and the kind of stable, or GM, has from Chevy all the way up to GMC and those kind of luxury end vehicles. But it felt like, as much as a lot of them were in that kind of upper bracket, which is probably a good thing, because they need to make the money on these kind of, halo cars before they start to trickle down to these more affordable EVs. It felt like, GM is so well positioned with this stable to take on the next wave of adoption. The obvious caveat being, then we have all the news that kind of flies around of losses, and I think that gets kind of a negative tone to it, of course, and people like point to it and go, see, this will never work. But you forget this is how companies like Amazon and Tesla and everybody else kind of burned cash and went through it initially to build the infrastructure, to build the the building blocks of what they needed to actually go and make a success of the business they eventually had. So I can't see why it would be any different with electric vehicles.
Well, and I was going to say from that there, I have two thoughts about that. Is one, and this is an area where I think GM operated correctly, even though they caught a lot of flack from the EV community. And that is in focusing on getting their battery production facilities up and running first, and then starting to roll out model after model after model. So they fell a little bit behind. I think they ran into, in particular, some issues with the GMC Hummer EV and the Cadillac Lyriq early on. And a lot of that had to do actually with tier one, suppliers for them in terms of tooling or parts that would be going into these vehicles. So it wasn't all on GM, the delays, but because they laid that foundation of the battery production facilities first, it's what's allowing them to sort of, sky's the limit, moving on. And I think we also, like you said too, they are focusing on the more expensive, sort of higher end, the Cadillac brand in particular. But with each one of these Cadillacs that's coming out, we also need to understand that there's going to be a Chevrolet branded version not too far behind. So you have like the Cadillac Escalade IQ. Well, the Suburban EV is going to be selling very well, right? There's a lot of people that would prefer the Suburban over the Escalade because it's a no nonsense people mover, right? As opposed to this sort of luxury people mover. Same with the Vistique, right? The Vistique was, what did it win, the 2026 German luxury car of the year award? And it's like, but following that Vistique is probably going to be the similar platform to the Tahoe, I would guess, if they make good on the plans for the Chevrolet Tahoe EV. So each one of these, and I think it just kind of also shows from a GM perspective, having these different brands allows them to spread out across these these badges that some people are going to have an affinity toward more so than others. And I think this maybe is something that Walter and I had spoken about before too, is yeah, you can look at GM's EV sales like model by model and say, oh, the Equinox sales suck or the Lyric sales suck. But after a while, and you say, oh, they're only selling 1,000 of these a month, or 2,000 of those a month, or 3,000 of those a month. But if they have 20 of them, now you have to think about like where that's going, right? When they might only be selling a handful of each model, but when you have dozens and dozens of different models across different brands, that cumulative total affects the market in a way that I think a lot of people maybe didn't understand. A lot of people in the EV space didn't understand. But the other thing too that you had mentioned, and I don't know if they had this at the Electrify Expo, was the GM Energy display. Because, you know, one of the big things with the Bolt that they were pushing was, hey, this comes natively with vehicle to home. You have to use the GM Energy Power Shift 19.2 kilowatt charger. I would suggest if they're going to do that, they should make it a dual head split power, because a lot of their EVs are only going to use half that power. But the Bolt does come with that vehicle to home. And I do think that those GM Energy offerings also insulates GM as a company, because even as things are getting tougher, they might be seeing reduced automotive sales, but the increase in like ancillary sales, like the vehicle to home integration, the backup power systems, and the fact that you can actually roll that into your financing, means that it's going to be a lot more likely that they're not going to have to worry about overproducing batteries at their Ultium Cell LLC factories, because we can just put them in our GM Energy products. And we don't just have to have private sector sales on that. We can have commercial sales on GM Energy products. So I think there's the whole idea is that, like, I think the diversity is going to maybe insulate them a little bit better. But anyway, yeah, I didn't know if they did have that, because I'm curious how much they're really promoting that GM Energy, if it was at the Electric Expo as well.
Yeah, this was very about the cars. There was I remember taking a photo of the GM Energy piece, but it was more on the charger. There wasn't a whole section to the energy side. Although it would be a fit, because it's quite a broad show. There's talk about, charging was there for the first time this year, as we'll get into, and they are starting to talk more about the storage piece. I think I actually want to go back to that as well, because there was some conversation around, the GM Energy products cost like kind of 8 to 15 grand, and how does that square with the energy system costing almost as much as the vehicle in some circumstances. So I do want to kind of go back to that. It makes more sense to me as you get up into those big trucks, the big 150 kilowatt hour plus batteries. But let's go back to that, because there's a piece I want to get into. But some of the questions that we've got coming in, so that we don't skip over those as we're on the Bolt and the GM products. Anthony over in Seattle, thanks for joining us. 2017 to 2020, Bolt was 20,000 sales per year. What's GM forecasting going forward?
And I think we just have to infer, right? Because based on that press release, they said that it was the Bolt plus the Equinox EV would represent a majority of their Chevrolet EV sales. So I would say that they're anticipating at least on par Equinox and Bolt sales. So I think that, like I said, I think it's just inferring. I haven't seen anything in concrete. And the only direct quote I can say from Chevrolet is, "We will build to demand." So if you want it, buy it. Sky's the limit.
Well, you're an original owner, because you haven't actually got rid of yours at any point, but both Anthony and I have taken up those 2017 or kind of early model year Bolts on the used market. So that is the deal of the day, or at least it was when we were buying. This one was actually answered in the comments, but for the rest of the folks listening, do we know when the cheap Teslas will be available? And Todd kindly provided the Tesla site ETA is November, December 2025. So we did have a conversation about kind of decontenting and how much that actually represents affordable EVs. I don't know if we need to go down that road just yet, but maybe that's something we can cover later on if we are lacking for topics. Okay. Then Thomas asks, how much will sales of lower priced EVs be hindered or not by the lack of level 2 charging in so many multi-family dwellings? You want to take a crack at that? Let's see. Well, you had you were there when you lived there. You were charging primarily at work. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think so. This is one that I wish Walter were here for, because we had this discussion. And I think there's also an understanding with the rollout or the proposed rollout of DC fast chargers, that an expectation that something like 60 or 65% of them need to be in metropolitan areas. And in order to, kind of compensate for that lack of level 2 charging. I also, though, have never seen it as too much of a hurdle. Having lived in that situation, you have to be committed to an EV to want one if you don't have charging at home or work. But it is possible depending on the metro area you're in, but you're almost never going to be using level 2 charging at that point. You're going to be using public DC fast charging. I know a lot of Tesla owners that did that, in particular in LA, where they would buy a Tesla and they wouldn't have charging at their apartment. They wouldn't have charging at home, but they would basically make a weekly or bi-weekly run to the supercharger that was in their neighborhood or whatever, to basically top up for their commute. So I think as long as we focus on the longer range EVs that can DC fast charge reasonably fast, and the current build out of DC fast chargers in cities is sufficient, I think it's going to go a long way in supporting that. But again, we're also only talking about maybe 20 to 30% of all residences that don't have dedicated off-street parking and don't have even the possibility of adding level 2 AC charging. So can I just one more point on that too? Because I've seen a lot of people say, yeah, but we only have 100 amp service at my home, so I can't add a charger. I dialed my charger down to 16 amps, and I could go down one more setting on 240 volt because of the limitations of my current solar system. A 20 amp service, a 20 amp charger running off of, or 16 amp charger running off 100 amp service at a home is still feasible, right? So I don't even see, in the case of some of these older homes with 100 amp service, that necessarily being that much of a hurdle. So
yeah, we still charge off. We're on 100 amps at home. We're only on a 3.6 kilowatts, I think, but yeah, we're on just above 3 kilowatts, and it really, for top ups and the mileage that we typically do, the only time that's been a limitation is when we get home late and need to go again the next morning and it's dirt low. But again, there's, we talk about some of the follow ups to the level 2 point where, Walmart, as a long-term kind of place where, they're within reach of 90% of America once they're kind of, project gets ramped up, Mercedes-Benz high-power charging at Starbucks. There's the metro areas are getting that have, significant airport hubs. We're hearing Mercedes-Benz talk about going into those. We know IONNA is interested. We have BP Pulse Giga hubs, just cropping up pretty much every major city across the country.
And segueing to there a little bit, because on that Bolt EV return trip, right, I stopped at that GM Energy from the 060, the different CPO, not the EVgo, and it's a terrible travel charger, right? It is like literally halfway between I-5 and Highway 99, which means no matter which way you're going, you're driving at least 2 to 3 to 4 miles off the freeway to get there. But it's in the center of this, residential town, Elk Grove, and it's right at a grocery store, large retail plaza. So again, servicing those people who live in those apartment buildings in Elk Grove, this is like a perfect charger. You go shop, do your grocery shopping, and you have 10 of these DC fast chargers there, just, ready to fill you up for your week's commute. So
yeah, that's just, I'll bring it back up quickly. Welcome to Computer Joe from West Texas, 2023 Chevy Bolt for 4 months now. Congratulations. But that's exactly what he is finding, relying on public charging, does once a week charge and hits not more than 100 miles there. So that is, as long as the chargers are there, that's the key point, because Crazy Postman had said, he's in a Tesla and the supercharger is an hour away. So you just go and use Francis, right? There's no problems there. But in most people's situation, as long as they have that fast charger and it's somewhere where they can go and just, hang out for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever they need, that's going to cover that 100 and 150 miles in pretty much no time at all.
Yeah.
Does bring us on to charging. Keep the questions coming. That was everything I've seen so far, but I'll try and stay on top of that. The charging side, we spoke actually to BJ Burtwell last year on the eve of the Electrify Expo in New York, and he was kind of pointing out, charging companies should be there. It's part of the customer experience. It's kind of a key aspect, as we've talked about ad infinitum every couple of weeks here, about charging being a piece that folks need to feel confident in, whether it's for the road trips or just for the kind of things we're describing to get close to home and charge up for their weekly run. And this year, although it wasn't 100%, it wasn't wall-to-wall charging, it was certainly much bigger in terms of the vehicles and even the e-bikes and various kind of electric mobility pieces. There was an EV charging section. They had representation from Marcy Bauer at EVgo was on the charging panel. Seth Cutler was there briefly to talk about what IONNA's focuses were. And then in the EV charging section, you had the ubiquitous presence, pretty much any New York show of Evolve New York, and the good team there who literally just blanket the place with level 2 charging, DC fast charging, and they are essentially, ever present at these New York events to show people where these chargers are, because they have done such a, sterling job of bringing charging not just to New York City, not just to the rich suburbs of Westchester and the Mid-Hudson Valley, but they go all the way up to the Canadian border. They go all the way out to Buffalo. And, there's a few gaps there. They still certainly have some places to fill in, but a combination of what they've done early on and then catalyzing that plan with NEVI funding has kind of made that almost a blueprint, I think, for other states that are the similar size and kind of coverage needs. So that was, still only really 2 or 3 vendors present, and some of them were only present on Industry Day, so it was a little bit inside baseball with that. But you're starting to see, I think, the existing players like EVgo and then the new players like IONNA starting to, Mercedes-Benz, these kind of companies starting to challenge the narrative that you can just throw chargers in and call it a day. There is this renewed focus on the driver experience, the need to make sure charging is not just there, but is also amenities, suitable for the area, the right power level, all of these things. So I guess, your take on kind of, well, wherever you want to take it, really. But, should these vendors be at these shows? Should the charging providers be more visible and in front of the customers who are going out to buy the vehicles at that time?
I definitely think so, because I feel like a lot of these CPOs right now are operating in a sort of invisible space. And there's only a few of us that are really kind of sharing our experiences actually using these different charging sites and charging networks on trips. I think, Walter does a very good job of, like, on the Network Architect channel, just kind of showcasing the different networks that are being built out. And just, it's that exposure that I think a lot of people, this is that Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Where you don't know what you don't know. And I think a lot of EV owners are simply defaulting to whatever their route planner tells them to do. And so a lot of these CPOs from the perspective of the consumer, right, from the customer, they're at the mercy of whatever route planner they select to use to guide them. But from the CPO perspective, they're also at that mercy. And so I think they really do need to be at these shows and, showcasing. And I'll say it right now. Like, I feel like an RFID card is still a valid option in today's EV world, even with plug-in charge and all of the other things that are going on. I still think it's a valid option. And I will say, as an early Bolt EV owner, right, and actually it wasn't even just my Bolt, it was also my Chevrolet Volt. I got RFID cards with them. Right. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh, you're telling me I can use this network. That's cool. I'll just, it's all of a sudden now it's on your mind. It's like, wait a minute, I don't need to rely on a route planner to tell me where to go. I have this RFID card. It's already set up with an account and it's just easy to remember. I leave it in my car. Sometimes I forget, but yeah, I just leave it in my car and then suddenly it gives exposure. It's almost like the equivalent of a business card for these CPOs. And then of course, like I said, I think personally, the user experience of a pre-set up RFID card is superior to everything except plug-in charge. And so if you can hand that level of customer experience, like literally hand it to potential consumers who are buying EVs, that goes a long way for the brand recognition of the CPO. And it goes a long way just in terms of positive customer sentiment saying, hey, look, they're giving me this, the keys to the kingdom, kind of literally, in the sense that, hey, now I can, when I'm traveling in my EV and I look over and I see an EVgo station, I see an EV Connect station, I see a charge point station, I'm going to pull in and I'm going to use it because they handed me this key to use their chargers. And I think that's an important level of exposure that I think these CPOs are missing out on.
And they still, for a much more mature market over in Western Europe, they still talk about RFID cards and the access cards that they have. Maybe it's because they've got these kind of amalgamated pieces of network where you can get one card like the plug surfing and just kind of go through countries to countries. But there's no reason. I mean, we have Canada and the US, but states are still different states. You start to, you won't get Francis Energy here in the Northeast, but as you get into the Midwest and over to Crazy Postman's kind of backyard, you're going to want to have those options. And I've got a Francis Energy card for that reason, because we go down to Pennsylvania and Ohio semi-regularly, and that's an extra backup. And some of those are actually pretty good at helping each other roam as well. You have ChargePoint and EVgo both cross over really well. I think it's possible to get into EV Connect kind of ecosystem with the ChargePoint card, and you can certainly have an EV Connect card as well. But again, you start to get that. If you've got app fatigue, you'll also get card fatigue, right? You don't want to have to reach for all of these, but you have one or two kind of core cards that you can just have, as you say, as a kind of universal access key in the sun visor. It's a nice thing to have as a kind of security blanket.
Well, and I think that's the other aspect of it that the CPOs need to look at, is because I think there's a very serious issue about I wouldn't even call it like app fatigue. I would call it account fatigue. Every time you put your payment information and account in a different vendor, and you're having to wonder, how much do I have in that wallet? How much do I have in that wallet? What's in this account? What's the hold for that account, right? Is there a membership for this account? It's just, in many ways, it's just too much. And I think the CPOs themselves, like, what is it they say, like the rising tide, like lifts all ships or whatever. So I mean, I think it even behooves the CPOs to encourage that sort of roaming federation, of RFID cards where, or accounts or whatever, just where it's a universal, hey, these are the participating members of this charging coalition, and your individual card and account works for all of these different vendors. So I think it's definitely, we're seeing some missed opportunities, but I used to be able to, off the top of my head, name all of the different CPOs, not just in my region, but across the country. And I would be loath to do that at this point. Like, there's just so many new ones. Like, I would be missing a half dozen of them just trying to recite like who's there and who isn't. It's just too much.
Last check I had was, there was 28 to 30 when I was kind of starting up in plug shares filters, and these vary as they go along. But last time I looked, like yesterday, there were 46, and it's only going up and up and up. So, and Walter finds this, if someone who's as into the depths of the AFDC as he is, he still finds a shot in plug share of a CPO in Texas or something. He's like, I have no idea who that is. He then does the legwork of researching it and finding the person to interview, which is fabulous. But then it's like, if he doesn't know what's going on, then what chance do the rest of us have?
Well, and even PlugShare, I think, gave up. They just have an other or non-network, right? It's just another option.
Every other category.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this will work too well. I made a small cut, but I haven't had much time to edit it. So let's see if the sound works. But this was the charging panel from the Electrify Expo. I think it was one of the first of the day. So let me see if this will launch here.
So I'd like to know, what are some frustrations that EV drivers are reporting with charging, and what are your networks doing to address those?
EV drivers want the chargers to be where they need them to be the fastest chargers that their vehicles can take. And beyond that, they just need to work without a whole lot of thought or effort. And so that's what EVgo is looking to address and continuously improve on, is making that a seamless experience where drivers don't need to make a lot of decisions or put a lot of thought into where they're going. There should be a charger there. There should be amenities there. The plug-in experience should be seamless. They should be able to walk away and grab their coffee, use the bathroom, grab a bite.
Kind of briefing on IONNA, our goal is to have 30,000 charger bays live by the end of 2030. I think we're on our way with that. We've contracted 10% of those already in the first year and a half in operation. We're over 900 bays in construction right now. And so if you look at like the early things that we deployed deployed, it was all around deploying canopies, car care, even simple things as trash cans and squeegees. You'd be surprised if you go to a charging station today. There's a lot of luxuries you don't have as an EV driver that you have as someone who's driving a nice vehicle. And so the first station we deployed, we said, hey, we really want to make sure that the amenities exist. So we built them, right? Well, we bought land, we do ground leases today. So really every decision we make for our sites and for our business with the driver in mind, and that really transcends itself into how we site select, how we design the sites, and how we really partner on the retail side. So you'll see that going forward as we build these locations. In some cases, we build sites without canopies to start. We'll come back in phase 2. We've already plumbed for the foundations for those canopies to add to it. You'll see other big announcements this year, next year on things we're doing on the retail side. We've done some partnerships with Amazon already, just workout technology and how we integrate that into the charging. So I think, I've been in the industry going on, I think 13, 14 years now, which kind of shows my age. But I think if you look at it, a lot of these conferences today are still around charging working. I think when we get to a place where the conference is around way more than that in terms of the retail experience and the amenities that are provided beyond, is it going to work on the first try? Then I know that all of us in this industry are successful in terms of not just deploying infrastructure, but really providing infrastructure that works for drivers in this market.
So yeah, I mean, the sound wasn't great there, so I apologize for anything that doesn't come through. But I mean, the essential, I think you kind of see some of the disparities between the existing networks, who are much more focused on what they've already got and maybe are starting to pivot towards some of the stuff that the newer providers are talking about. But then the IONNA side, which I think there's still a gap between what the talk and what they're actually walking. But you can see that they have the canopy piece, the driver experience. There's a lot of communication going on. Example this week would be the AWS outage on Monday for Amazon that didn't actually impact any of their chargers. As Mike said, they don't have an app and there's not much to disrupt there, but it threw out the access to the lounges at a few other places they had because it wasn't able to. The way you do it, if you look at the video I created on the Reynoldsburg rechargery, it sends a code to your phone and then you get an access to open up and unlock the door. So you can do that, and that they weren't able to do. They unlocked the doors at that point. The reason they lock them is because there's some homeless issues in Reynoldsburg that people can go in and just kind of camp out in there. But obviously, this kind of stuff happens on a whip. That dime. You have to really get that word out. And if you look in PlugShare, I don't know if it's still there, but they're actively in the process of saying to people who are looking at it for that location, here's what you need to do. You can actually get into the lounge. It's going to be open until this is resolved. So there's that kind of more driver-focused experience rather than just if the older ones had communicated at all, you're probably assuming it would be, an email, maybe a day after, sorry, this happened, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, that was an interesting, I think, juxtaposition, right? Because they're saying they're assuming the reliability is done, and then you can move on to focus on those other things. And I feel like there's some stark contrasts within the charging industry right now between providers. I think, Electrify America has made massive improvements in their reliability, but to that point, what Seth was making that point about, okay, now you have reliable charging, then what? There's still the issue of just 4 chargers in the back of a parking lot somewhere, and it's like, okay, what now? But what I'm seeing too is that there's a massive number of charging providers that still aren't even past that first hurdle yet, right? And it's really, if we get to that point about, it's not just are the chargers working, is the accessibility to them working. And that's, I think, where there's always been that big disconnect for these CPOs is, I think a lot of them don't know what they don't know. They don't know how many people showed up to their chargers, attempted to get it started, couldn't, and then left, right? So the best metric they have for that is something like PlugShare, which a lot of times people even aren't using, right? So, so
it's a good place to be. You certainly need to be on there to connect with EV drivers, but it's just the tip of the iceberg, right? I mean, you need to be in their inbox for sure. You need to be on social media. Some people just live in X. Some people live in a Facebook group, whatever it is. It's going to be hard to cover all those bases, but the fact that you're there and communicating and trying means a lot to people, because there's a period there where we'll get on to Electrify America here, just for your rant and for everybody else's rant, and I'll try and defend them a little bit if possible. But there was a period where they just went radio silent. They were actually up front, early days, quite responsive, but I guess as they just got to scale and just had the size of this and the scale of the upgrades that they were having to deal with, they just kind of stopped talking. Now, recently, there's actually been a lot of really good interviews with Tom Mologney for State of Charge. One just dropped today with IONNA, and then there's Electrify America from a week or two ago. So these are good steps to gain, to telling people and telling drivers what is coming. But it's only so much. You really need to kind of get out in front of these things when they're there.
Well, and I mean, I think there's some perceptions too where there's still to this day, I know a number of EV travelers who won't use a charger that only has 4 stalls, because the idea is they're expecting a combination of poor reliability and demand for those chargers to be so high that a 4-stall charging station just it doesn't instill them with enough confidence to even use it. Whereas I think had out of the gate Electrify America and others that were building these 4-stall chargers had 100% reliability, I don't think that stigma would have been there, right? We don't see gasoline powered car drivers, refusing to go to a gas station that only has 4 gas pumps. They're like, it's a gas pump, it's going to pump gas, right? So like the idea that we have this stigma within, the electric vehicle charging space, I think is a problem. And I think it's going to take a long time to move past that.
So, and I went to this place behind me here in Connecticut on the way down to the show, and kind of, Crazy Postman laughed, when there was an Alpatronic down. So yeah, it's still the same, more things change, the more they stay the same. But this was also the case at IONNA, right? I did the Reynoldsburg Rechargery video. There was one down there, but it's not, there's something about that previous stigma fused to the fact that there's only so many stalls. I mean, this EA had 6 stalls. I think the Reynoldsburg Rechargery had 12, possibly 6 dispensers. Yeah, so 12. So maybe it's the fact that there's fewer down, but again, you got CCS and NACS J3400 that we'll come on to. If you can only use the CCS ones at IONNA, that brings it down to 4 dispensers. If one of those is offline, that brings it down to 3. Still 6 stalls, but there were very few comments on the fact that there was an Alpatronic down at the IONNA site. But it was immediate, as soon as I mentioned this on LinkedIn or on the video, that it's Red Sea, same old, this is going to keep on happening. So they're going to have to, it's going to take a while to live that one down, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, even EVgo, I've talked about this too, in particular, or I should say specifically, the GM Energy EVgo sites that I've used, for me so far, they have been 100% first attempt activation. So granted, I have not used them a lot. I think that's maybe at this point a half dozen times that I've used them, but it's been 100% for me. And I've had other people tell me the same thing. Whereas on the other hand, I have other people telling me that their experience with EVgo has been absolutely horrific and they can never get them to work. And that Patterson Flying J location that I used it. It was perfectly fine. And a Rivian was using it along with me. The next week or two later, I went by in my Volt, so I couldn't even use it. Both chargers were down. Then a couple weeks later, I go by my Bolt again, and both chargers are working perfectly. So, like, I don't know if, in terms of that consistent reliability, there still does seem to be a question. So,
yeah, and I think, it's going to take that time. Everybody has their own kind of favorite network, and there's this piece as well of the supercharger network is huge, but it's still kind of bifurcated, right? There's people who have immediately jumped over there as it's opened up for their vehicle and aren't looking back. They'll only use Tesla superchargers because they just have the, supercharger reliability, the massive stalls, etc., everything else. But as you and I have kind of, gone on record several times saying they don't really work for us. I mean, for you, there's different reasons now, and we can get into those if there's any, time left. But for me, it's purely a case of practicality. It's slower because I have an 800 volt vehicle that can't get past 100 kilowatts. The latest Ioniq 5 can do 130, but for mine and for most people who are out there driving with it, it's basically less than a CPE 250 if those are paired at this point. So I'd go to those even before I went to a Tesla supercharger. And then there's the folks who are in the Tesla ecosystem, who these new providers who are moving to NACS, and this gets us onto the kind of NACS J3400 transition and how that's going. There's the need to win the Tesla drivers, some of them, over to those networks because they're installing the handles that those vehicles can use. The supercharger network is now just habitual. There's cars going to route them there. It's all kind of baked into that ecosystem, so it's going to be a real pull to do that. But you may have these opportunities on road trips where the Pilot Flying J is right off the interstate and the supercharger is in some grocery store lot, or on a stretch of whatever it is, South Dakota, where there's only a V2 supercharger and you could potentially get 250 kilowatts on the third-party vendor site or the IONNA site. Those kind of places may start to become attractive, but this is the kind of piece that we're moving into now of not just who offers NACS J3400 handles as that happens, but how do they win over the people who are kind of going to gravitate towards the supercharger network in general. And obviously Electrify America is starting to prepare for this. It's only 2 sites out of 1,090 or whatever they've got, so that's pretty early days. But you're getting IONNA coming out the gate with at least about 40% of the site having that connector. There's Mercedes-Benz are doing their retrofits now to get the handle in. It's going to start becoming more of a fixture. EVgo, I think, in your neck of the woods and some near me, starting to put those handles natively. So where do you see that kind of influencing people's decision to charge, and what strategy should those kind of providers start to adjust to or adopt to get those drivers in their ecosystem?
Well, I would say first and foremost, adapters suck. So I was kind of laughing, shouldn't be laughing, but Crazy Postman, I think, had posted that one up about an adapter bursting into flames at a supercharger. And then I think Leonard had mentioned too about EA not even using, right, or not even allowing the Tesla OEM adapter. So I think that's problematic just on the surface, right? You never want to set up a hurdle or a restriction for your owners. So really the only option then is to have both, right? And Electrify America kind of painted themselves into a corner by moving to those single plug balanced chargers, right? So almost everybody else, even if whether their charger is split power or not, they're providing both formats now, it seems like, moving forward. In terms of the ones that I think are doing the best job of it, I think IONNA and BP Pulse seem to both be emphasizing the NACS connector directly more than pretty much anybody else. My problem with them is right now they seem to be doing NACS on one dispenser, CCS1 on another dispenser. And I think that's probably a recipe for disaster. Maybe you could do that for one dispenser to site, but I would not want to see like these 6 dispenser sites where 2 of the dispensers are CCS1, 2 of them are NACS, and the other 2 could be one or the other. But I think that's a problem. But at least they're getting those NACS adapter or NACS plugs natively in them. I would say, believe it or not, I think actually GM Energy might be one of the ones that's doing the best job of it. EVgo is a little bit slacking in that regard, but they are starting to update some of their sites with a NACS adapter as well as CCS1, or just replacing the CCS1 entirely. Yeah, I just don't, I foresee this being a problem for at least the next 5 years. And then, like I said, with the adapters and the adapter certifications, UL listing, I think that's also going to be a problem. But I don't really see a good, clean solution either, because you basically need to be offering both plug standards at the site. And, you know, that's I think the missing piece right now. And then in terms of getting Tesla owners to use your site, that I think is an even bigger hurdle, because that's really at the mercy of Tesla themselves because of the way they've integrated their route planners. So I just don't, but then again, I also don't know if it's going to be that big of an issue, because you're always going to have the Tesla owners favoring, I feel like, the superchargers over the other public networks whenever possible. So I don't know that it's necessarily worth their time to go chasing after the Tesla market, the Tesla consumer market. Just make it so that it's easy and available if a Tesla owner does happen to want to use it. I think Electric Era does a great job of that, right? Where, again, there's no account. It's just, hey, pay with your card. Just, there's a payment reader here. Put your payment in, plug in your NACS cable or plug in your CCS cable. It's no skin off our back, whichever one you want to use. And then at that point, it really will ultimately, I think, be the market drivers, right? Like if you have a Tesla owner who says, hey, look, route me through the cheapest chargers that I can use. And then at that point, if a CPO can undercut Tesla in terms of how much they're charging to charge up a Tesla, then I think that's good. And then I don't even know if this is a big deal anymore. Maybe some of the Tesla owners can speak to this. But I think it might have been IONNA. One of them had to put a notice on their sites that if you have a pre-2021 Tesla, you need to make sure that you've received the CCS1 update in order to use our NACS plug. Because I think they were getting just hit with a bunch of, I can't get it to charge. I can't get it to charge. And it's like, oh, it's a 2018. It's a 2019. You didn't do the CCS1 update. So you can't use our NACS cable. So
I think that's a common note. It's even in the station description. It's definitely of IONNA, but also I think of the Mercedes-Benz. Yeah. Anyone who's starting to put these in has started to post that in, because it's, as you say, it's just going to be a, look, this is a disclaimer. We can't do anything more than say, this is the way it is. We can't change it, but you need to know it's not our fault. Well, pricing is useful, actually, because I do want to get on to an egregious example of pricing that I found on the way back from New York. But there are, I guess there's still some kind of pieces about access. You know, people had some questions about the way this is laid out. We've actually seen this kind of layout, I think, at some Walmart sites. Landon pointed out at the Arkansas Traveler, because he's on top of that, project at every site pretty much. But this, this kind of divided opinion for me. Some people were, this is exactly what I want. I want to pull into a stall and know that one way or another it's going to be serviced by whichever plug, CHAdeMO notwithstanding, that we can use that and just plug it in. Now, there were some restrictions with this, because it had, these ones in the middle here were a shorter cable. It was a bit like Tesla superchargers. You had to be right there, and the port had to be immediately accessible to be able to use it. But the swing arms are then on the two outer ones, so you can pretty much access the whole bay, and it feels a lot lighter, all that good stuff. And then you get the type of IONNA setup where they're each dedicated to one connector type and clearly labeled with a big sign on top. As you pointed out, maybe there's some issues with that as well as we get into adapter hell. But there's various ways to do this, and I think we're going to see a lot of complaints one way or another, as some people are used to this and then pull into an IONNA site and say I spent 5 minutes wasting time repositioning my car to go over to the other connector type that I needed. And then people with this who are like, it was really cluttered, I couldn't find the right handle, or it didn't reach my car, I had to reposition it. So even though we've started to get this path to the transition to one connector type, it's actually probably going to be about 4 or 5 years of just constant trying to kludge these solutions into different sites and figure out what works for people. It's also difficult for Electrify America because they've gone with the upgrade that they've had, literally ripping out 2/3 of their sites and replacing them, is now a single cable. You have to make the choice. There's no version of this unless they literally do another rip and replace, which has to be cost prohibitive at this time. That they either have to retrofit the sites they have or just slowly trickle in these type of sites to have the same connector you need in every stall.
Well, and I don't want to bag on Electrify America too much because I do think that they've done great work. I have some issues with their app, but yeah, in terms of that single cable dispenser too, one of the biggest issues I have with it is the lack of transparency for which chargers are balanced with which. So it's almost like they retrograded back to what Tesla was doing with their V2 superchargers, right? So V3 was a major upgrade in terms of not only does this cabinet, host these 4 stalls, if there's power available from this cabinet, it can then transfer to another cabinet that's hosting 4 other stalls. We know that's not the case in how the Electrify America sites work. So even if they were to take 2 350 kilowatt balanced chargers and put a CCS1 on one of them and a NACS cable on the other, we don't necessarily know which ones are connected with which, right? We don't know who belongs to who. And if a Silverado EV is plugged into that CCS1 and I want to get full power in my Tesla Model Y, do I plug into this NACS cable or do I plug into that NACS cable? I don't know, right? And that's another big problem that I think Electrify America is going to need to be able to address.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a pilot, so this is just, they've picked what they thought might work at this site, and the one down in Florida are the 2 sites that, have this solution so far, and it may not be, they've been much less enthusiastic about starting to stick in different hardware than a lot of the other providers. So see Walmart kind of vacillating, as Landon pointed out, between the 4 ports, the 2 ports, then ABB A400s in different locations. So they don't have all their eggs in the Alpatronic basket. You see Kempower starting to make a bit more of a play now. They're starting to be used in Revel and a few other sites that I've seen going around Minnesota, New York City. So hopefully, there is a solution that starts to come through. And actually didn't really even talk about the Omniport, which is kind of the charge point version of the Magic Dock in reverse. I've enjoyed that. I like the elegance of that solution, but the charge point touchscreens make it really funky to try and you have to hammer it, and then it's so unresponsive that it switches to it just as you've given up and tried to start from the app. It wasn't as friendly as it should be, but the situation with it is nice. But then you get the reverse Magic Dock thing of people don't know that it's there. Right, unless they're really looking for it. Like this happened with a lot of Magic Dock sites early on. People drove through and said, it said this was CCS friendly, but there's no way I can deploy it. So there's that piece of the education as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I see it too. Like the Omniport makes much more sense for the Charge Point Express. So the 250 or the Express Plus, the 250, because it doesn't really split power at the dispenser level, having the 2 discrete plugs makes more sense to me. What I saw at that 060, but yeah, so the Omniport, I still haven't had a chance to use that one. I don't believe. Yeah, I've only used their NACS, the ChargePoint's native NACS cable, which works fine even through my adapter to a CCS1.
Part of the fun starting to pigtail all of these adapters together.
Yeah, and one thing I was going to say about the Alpitronic Electrify America that you used, and just a lot of these CPOs in general, I'm going to harp on it again, is the pull-through parking actually alleviates a lot of those problems, right? Like when you talk about cable reach and which formats, there's a reason why you can pull into a gasoline station pumping island, whatever those kids call their fueling stations anymore. But you can pull into a gas station island and you have all of the different grades available, and they're easily accessible through a single pull-through stall, right? And so these charging providers already have an example, right? They're just actively at this point choosing to ignore that example.
Well, and this is what I say, like, you know, not to, you know, it's still quite early days for IONNA, so we don't know what they've got in their locker. But if you look at their current station footprint, only 2 of them have pull-through stalls, and those are the ones that they've built from the ground up themselves, essentially, or bought an old facility that already had pull-through and slid that in. So, you know, as much as there's the talk of the driver experience, you know, when we're all saying, I mean, people do harp on about this, pull-through is the way to go. This isn't rocket science. Gas stations have done it for, you know, decades. That still isn't being delivered on the ground, except for the kind of obvious ones that, you know, can do it out of the gate, like your Pilot Flying J's. But even Loves, you know, which is in exactly the same situation, essentially, unless, you know, I don't know their square footage and all that, but the vast majority of the ones I've been to of them, the first one in Jonestown, Pennsylvania, had a pull-through. That was an extended kind of canopy from the gas station. But a lot of the ones, I think Ripley in New York, and then a bunch of them along I-80 in Pennsylvania, were still just pull-in, right? Really nice canopy. Even the one with electric air in Buena Vista, Colorado, right? They're all pull-in. So and you may be able to pull across, but, you know, we're not talking about, you haven't designed it for that at that point. If it's a pull-in bay, then you haven't thought that that's a specifically pull-through effort.
Right. And I mean, and that was, I think, my single biggest critique of the electric era network is especially when they're doing their Sky Charger build, is that it's all pull in, nose in. And I'm willing to concede, right, that I don't think a majority of the charging stations need to be pull through, but I feel that a portion of them do. And right now we're way under that. We're way under that number. So.
Yeah. And I mean, like, as I say, it's even when you're talking about small networks, if it's only 2 sites, or, you know, you're talking that very single digit percentage, I think at least with a Pilot Flying J, they're close to like 45% of the sites, wherever they can make it happen, seem to be pulled through. So they get it from that point of view. And then you've got GM Energy, you know, the larger kind of Silverado EV, GMC Denali EV, those ones really starting to make that, because we're going to tow with these vehicles. Let's make it a reality for easy people to deliver.
Well, and I think that is one of those sort of powerful aspects of the GM Energy funded networks, because GM has a say in that, and they know the vehicles that they're producing, and they're one of the largest producers of EVs that can actually tow. So for them and their customers, this is actually a very important issue. But even with Tesla, we saw them catch up with that a little bit, right? Where for a while, even with people were towing with even like their Model Ys and their Model 3s, right? And they started to catch up with their own customer base and start, like, at first they were kind of halving it, right? With the nose in that kind of lets you have a trailer dangling out, but they've actually embraced the actual pull through option now, which they didn't before.
So can't avoid pricing, because I want to light up with one particular egregious example from it's on the Hutchinson State Parkway, which I didn't know existed till I was starting to find chargers on the way home from New York, which, again, Electrify Expo, really good show, but no destination charging. So still got some work to do there. It's in the Nassau Coliseum, and obviously that team or that group haven't decided to put in charging just yet. So that's something to work on. But the price on this place in PlugShare, actually, which shows again, don't rely fully on kind of the listings in PlugShare. You know, it's a good tool, but there are going to be some inaccuracies there or out of date information. Said 60 cents per kilowatt hour. So kind of, you know, on the high side, but not out of the realms of what you'll see in some of the stations that are convenient. So I pulled into this place, didn't really have a think about what it was going to look like, just like it was at what looked like a grocery store chain. So I was thought I'd get some food. And I looked at the equipment. I think it was Nidec Industries, some kind of, you know, one that isn't that familiar. But it was really nice, really well placed. It's off this through the kind of parkway, which is busy, but, you know, a nice little spot to jump off. 360 kilowatts, 2 stations. I think they could simultaneously charge. So I'm actually, as I'm pulling in, thinking I've hit pay dirt here, and I'm gonna not go off my route. I'm going to plug in at this place, which is, you know, busy but not awful. Grab my food from this market, which was advertising apple cider and, you know, really nice kind of fall treats. So I'm feeling good at this point. Bit of an EV oasis, and
not hard apple cider, right?
No drinking. Okay. Just, you know, this is New England at this time of year, and generally, you know, the Westchester area, you're gonna hit apple cider literally everywhere. So it's a nice, refreshing fall drink with no downsides. But, you know, so I looked ready to plug in, just filming a little bit for the usual, you know, you do this all the time, filming the session, and tap the price. It says, first of all, $100. That's the pre-authorization hold. Someone pointed out that IONNA listens to customers and pulled it down from 50 to 30. So now we're $70 disparity on that. So, you know, I'm not as worried about that stuff, but still, you know, the triple figures kind of set you off and ring alarm bells. And there's a $2 session fee, which we generally hate, but, you know, you still have these things. $1.20 energy fee per kilowatt hour. $1.20. So more than 2 times the national average, more than what was in the app by, you know, twice as much, on top of being slapped in the face by this you know, session fee and pre-card authorization hold. Now, in almost all situations, I would have not plugged in like any other situation, but I arrived at 5% and I was like, I don't know exactly where the next one's going to be. So I literally, you know, where I would have had dinner, I had my meal budget kind of, you know, planned to go in there, do that, and decent place. It was still a really nice place, clean restrooms, you know, good kind of snack and food options. Went in, used the restroom, came out. I'd unplugged already because I was not going to let that sit and charge me, you know, eat up my money. But and then I went up, you know, I carried on. Just it's immediately this Chestnut Market is the place. And avoid it at all costs if you are anywhere near New York, for the love of God. Even if it's going down in prices again, it's just, you know, they've deliberately decided to gouge customers on that one. You know, that is what really gets me. And the flip side of this, Evolve New York and New York Power Authority, thank you, because they had a second site. It's a NEVI funded site in a place called Katona, New York. Beautiful mid-Hudson Valley location. I went up there, paid I think 52 cents per kilowatt hour, which is a bit below the usual EA rate around that region, and went into town. Nice bakery, beautiful, relaxed kind of you know, town environment, and spend some money in the local community, which is what I like about EV charging, is when it takes me into those kind of places. But I have not found a more egregious example outside of dealerships, which have their own special kind of place in hell for some of these things. But, you know, the pricing of a vendor who is trying to serve EV customers, it must be at least twice the price of gas, probably more like 3 or 4 times. Yeah, that was my just story of absolute disgust, and that is going in the Hall of Shame in every newsletter I write for the next few months.
Yeah, not to one up you, but I have heard tell of one that was worse, and that was that one. I think it was famously bad. In fact, it was a charge point in Ohio that the city literally didn't know what they should be charging. So they're like, $5 a minute sounds fine. Yeah. On a 50 kilowatt charger. So $5 a minute. And yeah, that's one of those things where I think people rightly said, hey, if you're a charging provider and you're not setting the price, you should still be advising the company that, or the, you know, the organization that buys your charger to install it, on what an appropriate price should be. You shouldn't just say, oh yeah, $5 a minute sounds great, let's do it. Because it's counterproductive, right? Like that's a shopping plaza where all of those businesses would benefit from charging being on site. And it's one of those cases where at best you're going to get someone one time and then they're never going to go back, and they're going to warn all of their friends to never go back. So it's counterproductive for everybody, the CPO, the retail plaza, everyone involved.
And I think there's places where we can say, I understand that was a screw up, right? So a municipality trying to set pricing for fueling or whatever, that makes sense. It's just they messed it up, they went back and reset it. A dealership, quite often it's just they didn't want to put these things in the first place, or if they had to, they only wanted to use it for their vehicles, and they're trying to dissuade people, but they've been told put it open for the public, so they set $3, $4 a kilowatt hour or something insane. So when I see those, I'm like, well, people don't really want to charge a dealership anyway.
Right.
This one was definitely, I thought it was going to be a retail grocery store by the name. It was actually one of these places where you pull off kind of like a travel, so it was a gas station store. It's a fueling stop with a convenience store attached. Exactly what it should be, So they know what fuel costs. They know what the fuel role in this is. It's to bring people in and put the pump in the car and then go and buy all your tchotchkes from the shop. Right. So, out of sheer spite and general principle, I spent my money and they got whatever they will get from me that one time. But I'm not going back to that store. I'm never going back to, that brand. I'm actively going to tell people to avoid it.
Yeah, and until they address their pricing. So,
well, maybe even not. Just purely because I think that was actually an intentional thing. I don't think I would go back that one, but they could reduce it to 20 cents a kilowatt hour, and I'd just be, I don't, on general principle, jog on.
They could reduce it to 1 penny a kilowatt hour.
BP Pulse, and let's see, tomorrow, right? If you're
they're only 500 miles away.
Yeah, just crank on down there and fill up and find another expensive one to get you home.
It'll be worth it.
Yes, so I think we're kind of running out of time here. It's probably worth noting that IONNA is pretty cheap by national or growing national providers. I think their average is 39 cents per kilowatt hour. You maybe pay for the premium of those Pilot Flying J stations because they do have more like a 58 cents average, and some of their sites will go up into the high 60s, maybe even 70s. Francis Energy, I think, is kind of mixed bag in Oklahoma. I think they're at 52 cents per kilowatt hour, but elsewhere they're starting to creep up into the 70s in some places. So, these are the things that we're trying to weigh at the moment in terms of pricing. Like, obviously we know it's a premium to DC fast charge, but at the same time, people aren't going to go to these places and stick around if that's what they're trying to charge.
Yeah, and I don't want to say that it's a conspiracy. I think there's some market factors that are coming into play right now, and as EV owners, we need to understand even home charging. Right, we're now competing with data centers. We're now competing with AI. We're now competing with an increased export of domestic energy. That all of this now we're competing with other countries even for our electricity costs. So the national average, even as a residential rate, has gone up significantly. So I think in my area, they're all pretty much, at least in Northern California, everybody's pretty much somewhere in the 50 to 60 cent per kilowatt hour range, which might make some people cringe. But in California, you also have to consider that our gas is $4 to $4.50 a gallon. So equivalent gas car to EV, it's pretty much we're all in the same boat in California, paying very similar amounts to travel. So.
Right. This kind of brings us full circle back to home energy systems, right. And every one of us watching at the moment and talking has a big battery storage system sitting out there in the driveway or in the parking space. So at some point, this all starts to align, and those of us who have the ability to store energy and then push it back into the home may be in a pretty sweet situation.
Yeah. So, and then of course with solar integration and everything else, then you're pretty much riding for free. So
Well, it's kind of crazy with all the electric era talk and the fact that you love them. We didn't even touch on their new system, which is kind of AI powered, and there's a whole episode potentially in that. You may have thoughts on whether it's the right direction to go, but we are up against time here, so
yeah,
for another day, I guess.
I'd like to have some experience trying it before I comment too much on it.
That's why it's at the moment. I didn't put it in the news because it's more of a this is a press release before it's a product.
Right.
So we'll wait to see it in the metal, as it were. Yeah, well, we definitely squeezed plenty of topics out of that. Thank you, everybody, for dropping comments and questions and things for us to cover. I don't think we got onto too much of level 2, but we'll try and do that in another episode here as we move forward into the remaining months of the year. Walter will have some good videos coming for you in the next few weeks, I'm sure, from his trip. Eric has a ton of bolt content and his trip up and down from Southern California to back home, and vice versa was a real nice trip down memory lane. So thank you for cranking that out in addition to all the good bolt stuff. Yeah. And I published a video, so you can go and watch that, and there'll probably be another month till the next one. So apologies, but things are happening. For our respective channels, you can go to News Column 3705. That's your spot for all of the bulk content from the block party. Gone but not forgotten, the Network Architect channel, constant videos. People were speculating whether Walter would put out a Pilot Flying J update as he was on the road, and I wouldn't put it past him. So definitely worth checking that out for every latest update. And then, as I say, this is where some of my time is going at the moment. evi.plugandplay, ev.com. There's lots every week on what's happening in the news, the headlines, and the latest charging station construction. So great newsletter. So I appreciate it. It is a labor of love. It certainly takes up my Saturday nights.
Can we get some nuance? So.
The nuance is subscribe. Nuance.
For those of you who saw my cat video when I was at the Bolt event, they had an artist there, so I have a little commemoration to Hera the kitty. So the Bolt
iconic moments in your videos as the cats kind of come in and out. So rest in peace, Hera. We will miss you in the videos, but thank you for all you do for the kitty community, Eric. Everybody, thanks for joining us. We appreciate you hanging in a little bit later and all your questions. Until the next time when the trio of us will be back. Cheers, nerds.
Uh-oh, I think he left. Are we still live?
This can make the blooper reel. Never hit the leave studio button.
I don't have the button.
Bye, everybody. Operator error.